plan on how we can all become financially free. I listened to his words, but I could not fit what he said into my reality. I had talked about it, dreamed about it, and knew that someday I would do it. But the idea of being financially free was always an idea in the future, not today. "We've talked about it many times," Larry said. "I think it is time to stop talking, stop dreaming, and start committing. Let's write it down. Once we write it down, you know we have to do it. Once we write it down, we'll support each other on this journey." "But we don't have much money," I said, looking over at Kim, whose face reflected my concerns. "You know we're starting over again. How can we retire early if we don't have any money?" I protested. "I didn't say we were going to retire in a year," said Larry. "All I am saying is let's plan on retiring now. Let's write down the goal, create a plan, and then focus on the idea." As Larry spoke, I was reminded of my rich dad saying, "The biggest challenge you have is to challenge your own self-doubt and your laziness. There is no one in your way except you and your doubts about you. If you will take on your self-doubt and your laziness, you will find the door to your freedom." Rich Dad had had this talk with me just before I left Hawaii to come on this trip. Now, just a month after my talk with Rich Dad, I find myself feeling weak, vulnerable, and insecure, listening to my best friend telling me the same things. I knew it was time to grow up or give up and go home. As I tuned back into Larry, I said, "Okay, let's do it. Let's set the goal to be financially free." That was New Year's Day, 1985. In 1994, Kim and I were free. Larry went on to build his company, which became one of Inc. magazine's fastest-growing companies of the year in 1996. Larry retired in 1998 at the age of 46 after selling his company. Whenever I tell this story, the question I'm asked is, "How did you do it?" I then say it's not about how. It's about why Kim and I did it. Without the why, the how would have been impossible. All I will say is that from 1985 to 1994, Kim, Larry, and I focused on Rich Dad's 3 paths to great wealth, which are: first, increasing business skills; second, increasing money management skills; and finally, increasing investment skills. Rich Dad said, "The reason most people do not do what they can do is because they do not have a strong enough why." Instead of looking inside themselves to find their own why they want to become rich, most people look for the easy road, and the problem with the easy road is that it usually ends in a dead end. Why I decided to retire early. That New Year's Eve, sitting round the fire with Kim and Larry, I got sick and tired of my old self and decided it was time for a big change. I was fed up with being broke and always struggling for money. I was also tired of being average. All throughout school, teachers said, "Robert is a bright boy, but he just does not apply himself." That night, sitting on the mountain, I got sick and tired of being average. It was time for me to stop being average. When I was 8 years old, I came home and found my mom crying at the kitchen table. She was crying because we were buried under a mountain of bills. My dad was doing the best he could to earn more money, but as a school teacher, he wasn't doing so well financially. All he would say was, "Don't worry, I'll handle it." But he didn't. I remember deciding at the age of 8 to find the answers that could help my mom. That night, sitting on the mountain, I realized that I had found the answers I had searched for since the age of 8. It was now time to take those answers and turn them into reality. But the most painful why of all was the reality that I now had a beautiful young woman in my life, Kim. I had met my soulmate, and she was in this financial mess because she loved me. That night on the mountain, I realized that I was doing to Kim what my dad had done to my mom. At that moment, I found my real why. I found out, as my rich dad did, that I cannot tell anyone how to get rich. Find your why, and then you will find your how. As the old saying goes, where there is a will, there is a way. For me, I would say finding my will made finding my way possible. I learned years ago that passion is a combination of love and hate. Unless someone has a passion for something, it is difficult to accomplish anything. Rich Dad used to say, "If you want something, be passionate. Passion gives energy to your life." If you want something you do not have, find out why you love what you want and why you hate not having what you want. When you combine those two thoughts, you will find the energy to get off your seat and go get anything you want. So you may want to start with a list comparing loves and hates. For example, I love being rich, being free, buying anything I want, and I hate being poor, being required to work, not having what I want, or always settling for cheap things. Then write down your whys. Write down your dreams, goals, and plans on becoming financially free and retiring as young as possible. Take a look at this paper on a regular basis. Talk about it often. Ask for support. Be willing to continually learn, and before you know it, things will begin to happen. Poor Dad's Lessons. My poor dad often advised, go to school, get good grades, find a safe, secure job, work hard, and save money. He would also quote other famous lines, such as, neither a borrower nor a lender be, and a penny saved is a penny earned, or if you can't afford something, don't buy it, always pay cash. My poor dad's life would have been pretty good if he'd followed his own advice. But like many people, he said what he thought were the right words, but he did not do the right things. Instead, he borrowed money to buy his house and his cars. He never invested, because he always said investing is risky. Instead, he tried to save money. But each time there was an emergency, he would take the money out of his savings. He borrowed money for things that made him poor, and he refused to borrow money for things that might have made him rich. He was a good man who spent his life working hard, trying to avoid debt, and trying to save money. And those were the lessons about life and money that he tried to pass on to me. Rich Dad's Lessons. My rich dad, the man who was my best friend's father, offered different advice and different ways of thinking about money. He would pose various questions, such as, how long would it take you to save $1 million? Then, how long would it take you to borrow $1 million? Or he would ask, who is going to get richer in the long run? People who work all their lives trying to save $1 million? Or people who know how to borrow $1 million at 10% interest, and who also know how to invest it and receive a 25% per year return on that borrowed $1 million? He would also want to know, to whom would a banker rather lend money? Someone who works hard for money, or someone who knows how to borrow money and have that money safely and intelligently work hard for them? Or, who would you have to be and what would you have to know in order to call your banker and say, I want to borrow $1 million, then have the banker say, I will have the papers ready for you to sign in 20 minutes? Rich Dad would also pose such questions as, why does the government tax your savings but give you a tax break for being in debt? And, if you had a choice of education, would you choose to go to school to learn how to work hard for money, or would you rather go to school to learn how to have money work hard for you? And finally he might ask, why do the people who work the hardest and save the most pay more in taxes than people who work less and borrow more? When it came to work, money, savings, and debt, it is obvious that my two dads had completely different points of view. But the biggest difference in points of view was this statement by my rich dad. The poor and middle class have a hard time getting rich because they try to use their own money to get rich. If you want to get rich, you need to know how to use other people's money, not your own. Let me pause for a moment to offer you a word of caution and a warning. This program is not about borrowing money and getting deeply into debt, although I discuss the use of debt as a tool for retiring early and retiring rich. As I stated, leverage is power, and power can be used, abused, or feared. We should treat debt as we would a loaded gun, very carefully. Debt, like a loaded gun, can help you and it can kill you, regardless of who's handling it. Treat all debt as dangerous, just as you should consider all guns dangerous. Instead, let me remind you that this program is about leverage. Rich Dad would repeatedly say to his son and me, financial leverage is the advantage the rich have over the poor and the middle class. Financial leverage is how the rich get richer quicker. The problem with leverage, however, is that leverage is like a two-edged sword, which can cut in either direction. In other words, a person can use leverage to get ahead financially, and that same form of leverage, if misused, can be used to have them fall behind financially. One of the main reasons the middle class and the poor work harder, work years longer, struggle to pay off debt, and pay more in taxes is because they lack a very important form of leverage. And that is the leverage of financial education. So before you run out and borrow money to invest in assets, please know that debt is only one form of leverage, and that all forms of leverage have a sharp edge on two sides. Regardless what form of leverage you use, I first recommend that you educate yourself on how to use whatever form of leverage interests you. Rich Dad said, if you want to be rich, you need to know the differences between good debt and bad debt, good expenses and bad expenses, good income and bad income, and good liabilities and bad liabilities. If you are not familiar with the distinctions between these concepts, simply put, Good debt is debt that puts money in your pocket every month, and bad debt is debt that takes money from your pocket every month. For example, the debt in my apartment houses puts money in my pocket every month, and the debt on my residence, my mortgage, takes money from my pocket every month. If you work on increasing good debt, your chances of retiring young and retiring rich are greatly improved. But always remember to treat all debt very carefully. So how can you retire early? In the broad definition of the word, leverage simply means the ability to do more with less. When it came to the subjects of work, money, and leverage, Rich Dad would say, if you want to become rich, you need to work less and earn more. In order to do that, you employ some form of leverage. The good news is that more and more tools of leverage are being created today. Tools such as computers, the internet, books, audio programs, and more to come. But to get ahead in the financial world today, you may have to do away with obsolete leverage. People who use obsolete, out-of-date, or inadequate tools of financial leverage put their financial security and their financial future at risk. Today, millions of people are utilizing the financial tool known as the mutual fund to prepare for their retirement. While mutual funds are by no means obsolete, they are not the leveraged financial tools of choice of the more educated investor. If people want to retire young and retire rich, they may need to supplement their mutual funds with faster, safer, and more information-rich tools of financial leverage. It is ironic that the poor and the middle class think of the financial tools of leverage as too risky. Rather than utilize the financial leverage the rich use, the poor and middle class tend to use physical leverage to try and get ahead. Physical leverage is also known as hard work. The rich get richer primarily because they use the financial tools of leverage, and the poor and middle class do not. At least not in the same way the rich use those same tools. Debt can be winner's leverage. It can also be loser's leverage. In my other programs and books, I talked about the use of debt to acquire income